songs. Now, just because I wasn't here last week and because I haven't listened to the video, who can tell me what Di said last Sunday about the Beatitudes? The first few, I won't ask Di because she'll tell us the answer. Just anything you picked up from the sermon last week. To be humble. Yes.
We are all blessed.
We are all blessed, yes. Now, we've got a little bit of an echo there, David. Yep. Because I needed some context for the reading today, because last week's reading and this week's reading really flow into each other, don't they? They're part of the same Sermon on the Mount. People who are poor, the people who are struggling, the people who are needing to support and help. And God is saying they will be blessed. But the way that Matthew records the passage is not just saying that this is for those who need to be supported. The commentary that I looked up, which may be one that Di said, and this may be exactly what you said last Sunday, Di, but I looked up Bill Loader's commentary on this, and he said the focus on that first part is less on the needy to whom the promises are made and more on the hearers who need to be challenged to take up new attitudes. So in some of the passages, the focus is on those who need help and support. But what Matthew is saying, it's about our attitude and the way we engage with people that are really important. And encouraging us to learn from these attitudes and behaviours that we need to develop that allow us to be open to what God is doing in the world around us. Now, how bright do you feel this morning? On a scale of 1 to 10, how bright?
10.
10! So I told you Bri was bright this morning. It might depend on how we're feeling, how the week's been, the news that we've had, or what's been happening. How bright is God's light at the moment? That light that we talk about, how bright is God's light at the moment? Is it a bit like the clouds that, it's not very bright, we don't see it, or what's happening? Because God's is always light. That's what the Bible tells us, isn't it? God is light. But sometimes we're more aware of that light than others. Tell you a secret. Do you know how to make sure a solar panel is getting the sun? Face it towards the sun. Very good. How do you tell when you're facing it towards the sun? The shadow. Very good, Dawn. Someone taught me that trick. You actually make sure that the shadows are coming straight on the sides because then it's right in line with the sun. And of course, the other thing we found was that during the day, you've got to actually move the solar panel. You set it up in the morning, you go down the beach and you come back and find out it's actually the sun's over there and your panel's facing this way. And I'm wondering whether this whole being salt and light has got a bit to do with the direction that we're facing. And the light is always there, but it's a question of whether we're turning towards it, whether we're allowing it to shine on us. And then we're able to generate the capacity to actually share that light with others. So God's always there. And when we talk about God's blessing, God's always there, but it's our capacity to recognise the presence of God that is important amidst that change. So maybe what Matthew is talking about, encouraging us to recognise, is that there are things that we can do that help us to recognise and experience the light more than others. So the things that we can do that allow us to recognise God's presence. The photo of the clouds is when the clouds are over the top, you don't get anywhere near as much solar power being generated as what you do when there's no clouds. What are the clouds that affect us from recognising that light? For each of us, that can be different, can't it? Depending on a whole lot of factors of what's happening and how we see the world. I've been watching with interest the news about Alice Springs and the question about whether they should be severely limiting the amount of alcohol that is actually sold. And I couldn't believe it when they were actually saying that they were taking the sanitizer out of shops because the alcohol in the sanitizer was actually being used in the wrong way. Yesterday in The Age there was an article by Dr. Gourley, Gourley. Gourley. Anyway, he'll know what it is. And he raised the question of it's not just about limiting the supply of alcohol, there is something much deeper that's happening within the Aboriginal people. And that's the thing that we need to be working on. If we just limit the amount of alcohol, that will not solve the problem. And this is what he said. The key areas that must be addressed by all levels of government in order for progress to be made included poverty, housing, education and meaningful employment. Poverty, housing, education and meaningful employment. He said it was important for people to have hope for the future and to feel accepted and valued. I think they were very wise words and something that need to be considered. But also, is that something we need to be thinking about for the people around us that we may recognise that are not behaving as people of light? People who have experienced living in the light. Are there issues around poverty, housing and education and meaningful employment that we should be thinking about for them? And also how their sense of hope and their feeling of acceptance and being valued. But also for us. If we don't feel accepted and valued, that affects us and affects the amount of light that we are open to, because we can close ourselves off to the light and not feel the value and presence of that light. And while we end up with a vitamin deficiency, if we literally don't get out in the sun, there is a vitamin deficiency, there is a spiritual deficiency that we can receive if we do not allow ourselves for the light to shine upon us. This is what the writer in Isaiah is saying. He's saying there's no good doing all this fasting and all this things that you're doing in worship, which really you're only doing because it makes you feel better. Because you feel this will allow you to get in the good books with God and God will do what you want. What he's saying is that it's about how you treat people and how you live, and whether you work for justice and for needs of people. That's what is true fasting. And by implication that the thing we need to give up, fasting is about not doing something. The thing we need to give up is actually our own needs, our own doing things for our own value, just solely. But actually giving that up and doing things for the sake of others. That's what the writer from Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, is saying to the people. You need to be living out what God is wanting you to do. God is already doing that in the world. God wants you to join with God's work in the world. Now, isn't that what Bill Loader was saying about the first few verses of last week's sermon? The first few verses of chapter 5. And what Jesus is saying, it's not about you actually work at being salt and light. You actually, it's not our sheer effort. It just says you are salt and light. But obviously the question is that salt and light working in the world? Is it being effective? That was my picture of salt and light. I especially went to Woolworths and got some salt that was larger grain so we could actually get a photo of it, because otherwise it's a bit hard to... I thought that's easier. And did I go for the pink Himalayan or did I go for the normal? And did I get iodized? It was a bit tricky. We've been using that salt with a pinch over the last few days. It's very nice salt, but it's very hard to get a little bit when it's big chunks like that to spread over your meal. That's a picture of salt and light, even though you can only see salt, because you can see light as well, can't you? I could have put a candle there, I could have put, what I did was I shone an LED light, one that I could use for camping, onto the salt, because it needed to be portable. The light and salt. It's about being salt and light and living in that way so that we not only experience the light and all that the salt is, all that symbolism of the salt, it's actually living out God's light, God's presence, and sharing that with others. Then Jesus goes on and says about, he did not come to usurp the law, but to actually fulfill the law. This salt and light, the Beatitudes, it's all about fulfilling the law, being what God has called us to be, being what God wants to reveal to us, but we don't always let ourselves see, because sometimes we're distracted by clouds, sometimes we're distracted because we fold up the solar panel because we think there's not enough sun there. What is it that we need to resource being salt and light, not just as individuals, but as congregations, as people together? And how do we live that out in the world? As we share together in communion, that's part of the resourcing of being who we are and recognising that we are vessels to be filled with God's Spirit, God's love, as Di was saying at the start of the service. May we be open to that, and may we shine for Jesus.